Hello, everyone. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for the next session on Busihub, which talks about the whole aspect of performance management and EPM side of the world, including the all aspects of data and analytics here. I'm Sufyan Khan. I head the solution consulting team at Oracle, passionate about data, passionate about risk and finance modernization, and seeing how I can help customers in their journey towards finance modernization and transformation, which includes EPM and data. I'm joined by Gary Cokins. I'm going to let Gary do his introductions. Gary, over to you.
Thanks, Sufyan. Well, my name is Gary Cokins. I'm 74 years old, but I feel like I'm 44 years old. I've had a somewhat successful career. I started with a degree from Cornell University in operations research and industrial engineering. I've received my MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. I'm a native of Chicago. Go Cubs, go Bears, but that may not mean anything to people in other countries. My career started with almost a decade in industry with a large U.S. manufacturing conglomerate as a division financial controller. Even though I'm an industrial engineer, I like to say I'm an engineer masquerading as an accountant. I then spent 7 years when consulting with Deloitte, 5 years with KPMG Consulting, 5 years with EDS, Electronic Data Systems, that's now part of Hewlett Packard. And then for 16 years, I was with SAS, SAS, and many don't recognize what's SAS. It's actually the world's largest privately owned software vendor in analytics. And I have authored quite a few books, I think almost 10 books, starting with activity-based costing, which we'll talk about, and then broadening into enterprise and corporate performance management, EPM, CPM. So how about you, Sufyan? A little more about you.
Sure. Thank you so much for Gary. I mean, yeah, you really got a very industrial and very illustrious career, and obviously there are things which I would really love to pick up in your brains on that front. My pretty much my career has been again within the software space, servicing financial markets. So pretty much close to the domain, servicing the banking and insurance field. Started off my career within the capital market sections of FIS, then moved to Moody's Analytics, looking at the enterprise risk management space before moving to Adenza, where I worked as the head of pre-sales as well as into the aspect of leading the product development of IFRS 9 and IFRS 17. And then currently now with Oracle, where I lead the solution consulting team for the financial services applications. Again, the vertical which I pretty much love and pretty much work on is on the financial services side. Again, focusing a lot on enterprise risk and finance space, and that's the area which is close to my heart, where data is the cornerstone. And yeah, that's one thing I'm really passionate about and love talking about and love meeting people and learning about them also and what's their strategy around that. So yeah, thank you so much for asking. So just a bit of a kickoff. I think, Gary, I think the idea is to really pick your brains and understand some of the key areas, challenges around the EPM side. I mean, if I were to ask more of a question to you, like what, according to you, are the forces and what are the causes that create interest in enterprise and corporate performance management methods? If you can shed some light and educate the audience, I think that would be fantastic.
Well, I kind of have a laundry list of what's caused interest in EPM, CPM in the last 10, 15, 20 years. The first one is executives' frustration with strategy failure. Most executives are quite good at formulating strategy. Their frustration is failure to successfully implement the strategy. And there's some empirical evidence on this. There's an executive recruiting firm in Chicago, Challenger Gray and Christmas. They monitor the involuntary turnover of CEOs in North America. The firing of CEOs, it's increasing every year. I believe the reason is most board of directors post Enron take their governance job seriously. So if the CEO is not successfully implementing the strategy, they're fired. Carly Fiorini with Hewlett Packard being a good example. And of course, the solution to that we'll talk about later is the strategy map and balance scorecard from Kaplan and Norton. Another one is increased accountability. Today, there is no place to hide. Employees and managers will be monitored. They will be measured. That doesn't necessarily mean their jobs are at risk, but it could adversely impact their salary increases and job promotions. And the solution there then is the KPIs to monitor them. A third cause is more rapid decision making. Unlike a few years ago when you could test and learn and have meetings in conference rooms, today people are on the phone, go or no go, yes or no. They have to make decisions on the fly in real time. They almost wish an executive was sitting next to them and say, how should I answer this? Fourth reason is mistrust of the management accounting system. The reality is most managers do not trust the management accounting system. I'm not talking about the external statutory financial reporting for government regular, internal. And of course, the problem there we'll talk about is overhead cost allocations. A fifth reason is poor customer value management. Customers are really the source of value creation for owners and shareholders. The problem is the CFO and the accountants do not report customer profitability. They stop halfway down the income statement at product and service line gross profit margins. They need to look into and include channel distribution expenses, marketing expenses, selling expenses, cost to serve expenses. Another sixth reason is budgeting. This may surprise everybody. I think the annual budget process is broken. It's out of date a couple of months after it's published. It caves into the loudest voice and strongest muscle of the veterans who know how to sandbag it and so forth. So my recommendation is stop budgeting, but that caught everyone's attention. But that begs the question, what was the purpose of a budget in the first place? And how can we basically replicate it with capacity sensitive, driver based budgeting and really progressing to rolling financial forecast? Another cause, and it may not impact everyone unless you're in the supply chain, business to business, but the supply chain is dysfunctional. Most customers view their supplier as the enemy. If we negotiate lower prices with a customer and put them out of business, so what? We'll get another supplier. That's got to stop. It needs to be a marriage. Trading partners in the supply chain are competing against other supply chains. And finally, unfulfilled return on investment promises from large ERP or CRM, ERP, enterprise resource planning software vendors. And the issue there is if you ask an IT director, after the organization's gone through a couple of years of laboriously implementing the ERP system, you ask them, how well do you believe the return on investment has met or exceeded what the software salesman sold you on 2 years ago? Many will be hard pressed. That does not mean you shouldn't put the ERP system. You have to. Your competitors have put it in. The problem there, though, is ERP systems produce a lot of data, but not necessarily information. You convert data into information. Data tends to be transactional, purchasing systems, payroll systems, and the like. And what the enterprise performance management methods, and we'll talk about what the methods do, is it releases the data like seeds from the ground, and that's where the ROI comes from. So that's a long list. And then there's analytics. The use of data science and analytics is also causing. So that, I think, is a list of 9 causes and forces of why there's interest in EPM and CPM.
That was pretty extensive and pretty informative, Gary. Thanks for that. The other question, which probably obviously links again back to the one which you clearly highlighted about the challenges, is there's a lot of confusion and lack of consensus as to what enterprises and corporate performance management is. Can you define in what's your terminology and what is the true EPM or CPM process here?
Well, I'm going to draw on some of the things I just talked about the last couple of minutes. To me, EPM and CPM, and they're synonymous, is not a system. It's not a technology. It's not a process. It's the seamless integration of the multiple methods. Methods like profitability and costing, using activity-based costing principles, strategy map, balance scored, KPIs, enterprise risk management, process improvement for cycle time reduction and quality improvement, like with lean management or Six Sigma, and many others. So these are like gears in a machine. So to me, the definition is when you seamlessly integrate all of them, you get a lot more synergy and even more power and synergy when you embed analytics of all flavors into each of the methods, like regression, correlation, clustering, association. And I know some of you listening to me took those courses in college and said, I just want a passing grade and get out of here. Well, sorry, it's here, data science. But the good news is, you don't have to go to your attic or basement and dig out your old college textbook, but you need skill sets in your organization that have those competencies.
Well, that's true. Completely. I mean, there's no question about that. It has to be relevant and has to be in a practical approach. So no doubt about that. And I think of the forces and causes you described, which three do you feel are the most impacting or improve an organized operational or financial performance, or what exactly is what organizations should do to improve the financial performance?
Three of them. Okay. Well, I'm going to be a bit biased here. I'm a real fan of activity-based costing. This is for profitability and cost reporting and analysis, the FP&A function. And I know some of the people listening will say, "Oh, ABC, it doesn't work. It's too difficult." And that's because it has a bad reputation from over a decade ago that the systems were too large, too complex, no one could understand them. They weren't maintainable. I have authored several ABC books, and I have techniques because I train consultants how to implement ABC called rapid prototyping with iterations. You can get a system in 3 weeks, not six months. A second one would be that strategy map and balance scorecard. I'm just a really big fan of those types of measurements. The problem that Kaplan and Norton, Professor Robert S. Kaplan, Harvard Business School, who, by the way, trained me on ABC. I got recruited from Deloitte to KPMG when he was going to be an instructor, and then Dr. David Norton, is that two things. One, most employees and managers don't understand the executive team strategy. I mean, for example, if I went in the hallway of any organization and randomly interviewed 10 employees and say, "Quick, can you articulate the senior executive team strategy?" How many could do it or do it well? Often people say none. Well, if managers and employees don't understand the executive team strategy, then how do we expect them to understand what they do each day, each week, basically contributes to implementing the strategy? So, and that's where the Kaplan Norton comes in. If you're interested in it, just do a Google search on strategy map and you'll get the idea. I think the third one is back to the budgeting, driver-based budgeting. The way typically managers create a budget is they give companies implement a budget. They give every manager a spreadsheet, January to December with their general ledger expenses, including rubber bands and paper clips. Someone then consolidates it in the accounting department. They bring in the forecast from the sales team. They give it to the executives. They say, well, that's okay, but not enough profit. So they put the spreadsheets all the way back. The managers lower some of their expenses, back to the consolidation, back to the executives. They say, that's a little bit better, but not good enough. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. You almost want the executives, what number did you want in the first place? So we're not spreading all of these spreadsheets. But that would be their aspirations. A better, more effective way is to use the EPM methods. Do what we call calculating the costing system backwards, forecast the volume and mix, take it through the unit level consumption rate, solve for the level of capacity, number of employees, and their salary and wages and purchases with suppliers, and also include risk management, mitigation expenses, because typically the budget is disconnected from the executive team's strategy. Put in the projects for the initiatives and processes to improve from the strategy map, and then capital budgeting. So it's much more of a modeling technique. So those would be the three that I would choose, Sufyan.
Okay, fantastic. Sounds good. Thank you so much, Gary. I mean, that's extremely insightful and extremely productive, and really picking into your year's experience, especially on the whole aspects of activity-based costing and what exactly drives performance within organizations.
Let me ask you a question and see whether you're experiencing what my experience. To me, very frustrating that the adoption rate of these various EPM methods is very slow. Many organizations, I have empirical evidence that 95% of organizations that should be implementing activity-based costing are not. A lot of it is for misperceptions. Some of the problems have to do with resistance to change. It's human nature. People like the status quo, fear of others knowing the truth. I don't want other people in my company to know what my costs are. Fear of being measured, fear of being held accountable. Notice none of those have anything to do with technology or systems. It's all about people, and you need really behavioral change management to get their buy-in. You need soft skills. So how about you? What are some of the barriers that have been slowing the adoption rate for what you've been involved with?
I think that's a very good question, Gary. I think from my perspective, when I'm dealing with organizations, I think I I think the first thing you got to recognize, since the whole different scandals which have happened, Enron, Arthur Anderson's, all the way up to from the crisis, so the financial crisis, and then obviously post right now COVID, I think there's a strong emphasis on governance, compliance. I think there's a huge emphasis on transparency, the whole aspects of record to report. So when you're really looking at the larger CFO organizations and really looking at the FP&A side, I think that's one of the areas where they're really trying to drive towards. And I think where we really see, I think on one side, we come with a very traditional approach to an extent where people truly believe don't touch it if it's not broken, which means people get so consumed by what is actually comfortable and what's working that they can pretty much get resistance to change. So it's not that the applications don't exist out, it's more about the whole aspect of change management and adoption. I think that becomes one of the key drivers, and that's where it becomes a bit more resistant to change. I think with the aspects of everything moving towards the cloud, people really want to reduce the capex and then move towards more like an opex model. That's one. And again, when you're really looking at the aspects of EPM and the whole aspect of the analytics coming into the picture, one of the main drivers is you're only as good as your data, and you're only as good as what the your data feeds are basically coming in through. And I think that's because fundamentally important, because the majority of the time in any sort of an implementation or a project or any driver is more about the data. It's more about how your data flows from the left hand side to the right hand side, and can I go backwards? And I think that's where it's an aspirational move to get a more record record to report, because you're really looking at one thing which you really want to avoid is the whole aspect of garbage in, garbage out. And so a tremendous amount of time is basically spent, the energy spent on the left-hand side with trying to get the right kind of data, validate data, harmonize. So that's where the data stewards relationship, and he becomes more like the gatekeeper. But I think once that is sorted, then obviously the flow looks at how you really want to look at your EPM functions, how you want to plan the budgeting and the forecasting. And once you have the historical data, then you're looking at applying that level of projections to see how the forecast versus budgets. And I think that's where Gary rightly pointed over aspects of forecast and budgets. And that's where we're really looking at running the next level of projection analysis. But that again, we're seeing a lot more scenarios taking place in the market where the CFO organization is factoring a lot more scenarios with more worst case and best case as compared to what they were 5 years back.
When you said garbage in, garbage out, it reminds me of something that I've always observed. I'll say this phrase: in the absence of facts, anybody's opinion is a good one. Yep. In the absence of facts, anybody's opinion is a good one. But usually the biggest opinion wins. So, which is the opinion of the boss or the boss of the boss. So, to the degree that they may be drawing on their intuition or sixth sense or flawed and misleading data, which is what happens with activity-based costing compared to that butter spreading traditional overhead. Let's just allocate the indirect expense overhead on number of labor hours, number of units produced, sales amount, and so forth. So, but you mentioned about change management, and I don't have a degree in psychology or sociology, and I'm a kind of an amateur at change management, but I've in my career have been following kind of a formula. And the formula is this: D times V times F is greater than R. Those listening to me, you may want to write that down. D times V times F is greater than R. R is resistance to change. It's a huge amount. So you're asking what's D, V, and F? D stands for discomfort with the current state. Unless people have unhappy or some pain, they're not interested in changing. V stands for a vision of what better looks like. So if the D is big pain, they're looking for the lifeboat or the life preserver to solve it. But F is the sleeper. F is first practical steps. Because if they believe the vision is theoretical or impractical or unaffordable, they're not going to go ahead. And because D times V and F are multiplicative, if there's zero or low, you're not going to overcome the resistance to change. And a real key there is that D, discomfort. There's got to be some presence of pain. But back to you, Sufyan. In your view, what are some rising trends or innovative ways that organizations are applying analytics to drive performance?
I think, again, going back to your point, I think, and you raised it pretty well, it's about not just looking at what you can see now, but what is the projections going forward in the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. I think, look, assuming you're able to get the data correct, assuming you're able to run the record to report process, but that's only a team plus zero, or I would say day zero kind of factor. But it's not running your the what if scenarios which you probably be looking at. Okay, now there's a COVID situation. What if the inflation were to increase by another 3% or 6% or so? If savings reports or drawdowns are probably going to be increasing further, or your loan loss forecasting or provision amounts were to increase, how would that have an impact on my performance? How would that have an impact on my forecast? How that would that have an impact on the budget? How can I apply a growth factor and see what would the results be looking like? So it's about giving that augmented flexibility to the CFO's organizations where they really want to run different scenarios, model the different scenarios, whether the scenario from a regulatory perspective, whether the scenarios from an internal assessment perspective, and see what the forecast would probably be and see which is the most realistic forecast. And that's only possible now because once you've got the data, and this is where the next gen architecture, next generation of architecture, you should probably be looking at areas of applications of AI and machine learning. I don't want to get in the aspects of generative AI because that's a very new hot topic, but I think you're really looking at a huge amount of data when you're applying artificial intelligence and looking at the machine learning capability, because that's where you run your projections without actually deploying the data, because that's where the machine is learning the data and seeing what the results would be if I were to apply different scenarios. And that's where the whole scenario forecasting process becomes much more quicker, faster. And look, you've got to look at it from the perspective that the more there's a regulatory check and the regulator asks you for these scenarios, then you're able to come back with a much more quicker turnaround than currently what it's taking longer for, because by that time the scenario will probably change. So I think that's where there is a huge expectation of agility in your FP&A planning purposes, especially in the performance side. But at the same time, is the whole consumption of data, which has to be as realistic as possible. And this could probably be a combination of historical data, which you normalize and then try to run it on more from a projection analysis point of view.
Well, let me ask you a question, and then if you can remember, ask me the same question back, I'll give you my answer. But in your career, what has been really one or more, actually just one major lesson learned by organizations that have either been successful or unsuccessful attempting to apply data analytics for solving problems or pursuing opportunity? What's one major lesson learned that you've observed?
I think the most important thing we should probably be looking at is you really got to at some point take a back seat and visualize your functional architecture. You get drawn by technical architecture, but you should like, just take a functional architecture that does it actually make sense. Do I've got so many interconnections? Can I rationalize it? Can I streamline it? Can I help reduce my cost of ownership? Will this help me in my bottom line? And I think that's where you really need to have that constant change and evolution happening. The problem what's happening in organizations right now is they're pretty comfortable with what has been running and functioning, but no one is ready to bite the bullet, take a backseat and say, okay, we could probably improvise this process. We could probably get rid of this legacy architecture. We could get rid of some of the whole aspects of Excel and flat files because we want to improve our governance process. We want the entire organization to have the same user experience. So I think those are the questions we need to be asking. How can we make the turnaround times quicker and faster? And I think that's the lessons there. And I think obviously data is at the cornerstone. But I think the approach should be you bring data once, but how you can use it multiple times across the entire organization, but not just for one use case, but for all the different use cases. So, and I think that should probably be the approach, ethos, driver. And if you adopt that driver or adopt that objective, then you're able to streamline a lot of your functions, processes. I think I think the user experience from a team orientation point of view also becomes a lot more quicker because the teams are then more operationally efficient. There's operational efficiency. They're able to do more in the amount of time. They're not spending time on the different mundane tasks. And I think that becomes one of the key foundation factors when you're really trying to implement a very strong EPM or CPM solution, and with the whole aspect of the data analytics completely surrounding it. the other important thing is that the aspect of data analytics can be very spread across a very wide term, but it goes beyond the applications of the EPM function. It goes beyond the application of just looking at from a record to report. It goes all the way from how am I got this rich set of data? How am I able to monetize that information? Can I use it on across the different silos of the different organizations, especially when you're really looking at it from a planning and forecasting point of view? Or not just be, and okay, now that we have this, can I apply some customer analytics? So it's not just data analytics, but it's also looking at from a CX point of view. So customer insights, customer experience. How can I really improve the user experience from an end customer point of view? So I think those are the points which actually get diverged in, and I think that's also giving a lot more insight to the CFO's organization. But Gary, I think choosing back this question, I think that's more of my experience with a lot of the clients I have been working with. What has your experience been in learning more about how the EPM and CPM function? And it would be pick on your side how the data analytics world has evolved or what you see the current trends in the market.
Okay. So before I describe what I think, what I've observed as a major lesson learned, just a little personal stuff. I mentioned I've authored books and articles. I have a website. It's www.garycokins.com. I retired from SaaS after 16 years, 11 years ago. I'm just having fun, just sort of a solo. But under the horizontal tabs are many, many content that anyone can download. It's all free. I'm not trying to sell anything. In terms of lesson learned, there's really two. One of them I already mentioned, the resistance to change. People underestimate it. And so you really need to have some soft skills. Most managers, including probably you and me and everyone listening to me, we are what I call Newtonians, like Isaac Newton, the physicist. To us, the world's a big machine. Give me the levers, pulleys, dials. We need to be a bit Darwinian, like Charles Darwin. The organization's an organism, sense and respond. You need some of that kind of skills. But the other lesson learned, what you just sort of mentioned about the customer experiences, I think it's really critical to measure customer profitability. Again, most CFOs and their accountants, they stop halfway down the income statement, product and service line, gross profit margin. They need to include channel distribution expenses, marketing expenses, selling expenses, costs there. And why? That's because marketing and sales are asking this question: which type of customer is more attractive to retain, to grow, to win back and acquire, and which types are not? Because it's always a shock when organizations actually do a full activity-based costing and do a profit and loss statement by each customer. Where the shock comes from is they'll say, oh, here's our largest customer in sales. They must be our largest in profitability. No, in some cases, they're so demanding. They're always changing delivery schedule. They're always calling help desk. They're always returning goods. They're always asking for special, not standard. So when you include all of the extra effort and work for that type of big sales customer, you discover they're not as profitable as others. They could even be unprofitable. And then that creates questions. Why are some customers not as profitable as others, independent of sales? And then that leads to the next steps. What actions could we take? And Julian, I know you're listening to this. That would be another podcast by marketing people about the actions that you can take: cross-selling, upselling, fee-based unbundling, and the like.
No, I can't agree with you more, Gary. I mean, it's music to my ears, not because you mentioned all the aspect of customer profitability, but I think you're reaching a stage where the CFO organization just doesn't want to look at information at the aggregate level. They really want to drill back all the way to the customer level of profitability. They really want to identify which are the most profitable customers, which are the least profitable customers, what are the cross-selling opportunities. And they just don't want to look at it from a day zero point of view, but they want to run scenarios and see, okay, I want to apply a scoring model on the customer and see, okay, are the scoring or proximity scores which I've applied, which customer falls in what category, which wants a mortgage, which probably might want a mortgage based on the usage pattern, which might probably look at an insurance policy. So it's not about selling for the sake of selling, but it's about enhancing the user experience by selling things which the customer really needs, instead of going with the aspect of what is it that I want to sell. Trying to understand what the customer, and that only builds the relationship with the end customer only better, because at the end of the day, you're giving them something what they really need, what they want, and then obviously get into the aspects of the pricing and all. But the other aspect which rightly mentioned is not just looking at an income statement from a bank perspective. It's going down all the way to the income statement of a customer, and going to an income statement from a customer point of view and seeing, okay, if I apply different scenarios or shocks, how would this impact so and so customer? Because the benefits are two levels. One level is you're identifying this from a bank's profitability or a company's profitability point of view. But the other aspect, you're also looking at it from uh, if this customer is going to get in trouble, then maybe we need to start preparations of creating and increasing the provisions, because this is possibly could be a likely scenario in the next 3 months, 6 months or so. And we need to probably start preparing, keeping more provisions aside. Like, for example, it could be the situation of a geopolitical situation where we had the energy crisis happening, or energy and inflation hitting through the roof, and that's going to impact a lot of families. But if you were to precede these effects a couple of months in advance, that gives you a lot of lead time to ensure the provisions are in place, and then you're doing a qualitative and quantitative assessment, not just to improve the bank's profitability, but also ensuring that you're providing the right sort of help to customers who are in trouble and need that support. So it's also giving back in terms of from a society point of view at the same time.
We probably shouldn't overstay our welcome with the audience. So let's move on to some concluding remarks. I'll share my concluding remarks, and then you can share yours. One of them is I'm a big fan of the Professor John Cotter about the difference between managers and leaders. But basically, managers, what they do is they cope basically with complexity. So they got org charts and budgets and the like. But what leaders cope with is change. And so what good leaders really need to provide is, I think, vision and inspiration. Vision, yeah. Where do we want to go? How are we going to get there? That kind of ties into the strategy management stuff, and inspiration. To me, leaders without followers are just taking a walk in the park. I'll say that again. Leaders without followers are taking a walk in the park. And let me make one final observation for the concluding remark, and then you. I believe in the past, the best leaders and the best executives had the best answers. Today, I don't think that's the case. Today, I think the best leaders and best executives have the best questions. There's too much complexity. There's too much volatility. There's too much uncertainty for them to rely on their sixth sense or gut feel or the types of answers they had earlier in their career that got them promoted to the top. They need to create a culture for investigation and discovery, and asking questions. The best leaders ask the best questions. So, how about yourself? What's your concluding remarks?
I think that's true, Gary. And I think from my perspective, a couple of points just to come to my mind is, yes, you're right. It's about leaders and followers, because people are really looking at it. But and again, the whole aspect of managing and leading, it's a different. Some people say it's a science, some people say an art, and probably it's going to be a combination of both. But I think we are in the age where there's data and data points being thrown at us from different directions. And I think you're right. It's about filtering that level of information and getting to the point which is really relevant to you in a quick and timely manner. And I think that's where it's really getting into the grain. Like, for example, my last question talked about the aspect of analytics and custom. But I think the idea is that if I want to get into if I want a quicker answer, what a 3 months or 6 months down the line, what my results would probably be, or what impact would the customers be, that's where you get to do the topic of predictive analytics or so. And I think that's where you're trying to cut to the food chain that, look, this is my universe, but this is the probable scenarios which I could probably be. And I think that's where you really need to lean on some of getting the results as quickly as possible. I think there's going to be, where we see the market, there's going to be a huge shift towards one, to getting the responses, but heavy dependency on technology for you to get to that level of responses. And again, a responsible use of technology is also fundamentally important, because on one side you say, okay, yes, we got AI and machine learning, but is it responsible? Are you using it in a responsible manner for CFOs to try to those results? I think that's going to be one of the key points. There's going to be governance. I think that's still going to stay. Aspects of data infiltration and getting to results much more quicker, because there can be data which is clustered and unclustered, or structured, unstructured data. With ideas, how do you filter that quickly to come to a result? I think those are the areas where we see the market moving towards that. And I think anything, whatever do, anything which you implement, anything which is groundbreaking has to be sustainable. And I think that's the area of sustainability comes into the picture. So I think we clearly see areas of governance. We clearly see areas of data analytics and how it get to the results much more quicker and faster. I think that's going to be the challenge for the next CFOs, organization, or people, senior leaders, because they want answers, but they want answers quickly. And then the question is, so what? Okay, now I've got this answer. So what? What do I do with that? And I think that's the next charter. So that's going to be the defining moment between what a manager is and what a leader is, because the leader may have the information, so does the manager. But what really differentiates between leaders, how does he take that and steers the organization in the right direction? I think that's going to be key from there.
I would like to add to your so what. Actually, it starts with, what, so what. The third one, then what? All decisions are in the future. So I think we need to do our thank you for the people that are attending. I appreciate it. I hope those who attended found Sufyan and my banter back and forth not only interesting, but also relevant. How about yourself? What's your thank you?
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time, Gary, and thank you for sharing your rich experience and learnings. And I hope we get to do this again soon. And I hope the audience have more can come back to us and connect with us, so that if there are any questions we can address them, happy to do so. Either they can connect directly to us, and yeah, we can just take it from there. Thank you so much.
And they're welcome to invite us in LinkedIn.
Yes, absolutely. Connection to that. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.